On a sparkling winter night, with stars twinkling like diamonds in the sky, a lone wooden cabin stood nestled deep within a dense forest. A warm fire crackled merrily outside, casting dancing shadows on the faces of 4 women gathered around its glow. Each face held a story, a history etched in its lines. A profound silence hung in the air, broken only by the whistling of the cold wind through the trees. Elena pulled her scarf tighter. This cold is seeping right into my bones. It's a good thing we lit this fire, or we'd be frozen solid by now. Another woman smiled, a mysterious glint in her eyes. The cold is biting, but it's the perfect weather for sharing airy tales. Why don't we tell some intriguing stories to pass the time? Yes, a third chimed in, her voice filled with excitement. But they have to be properly scary, the kind that makes your hair stand on end. Suddenly, the crunch of footsteps on the rocky forest path echoed through the clearing. The women instantly fell silent, their eyes darting towards the darkness. What was that sound? One whispered. From the shadows, a young girl with a backpack emerged. She was bundled in a warm jacket, but shivered as she cautiously approached the fire. "I'm so sorry to intrude," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've lost my way. I was trying to reach my destination, but I'm completely turned around. Could I possibly stay here for a little while?" One of the women gestured to an empty spot by the fire. "Come sit. We're all just waiting here for our own final journeys to begin. Relax by the fire and get warm. What's your name?" "Thank you so much," the girl replied, relief washing over her face. "I'm Maya." The women introduced themselves one by one, and Maya's unexpected arrival seemed to ease the tense atmosphere. "So," one of them said, breaking the new silence, "who's going to start with a story?" Maya looked curious. "What kind of stories?" "We're sharing horror stories here," another explained with a playful smirk. "You won't get too scared, will you?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Not at all. I absolutely love hearing horror tales. This will be fun." The woman chuckled. "Be careful. Listening to scary stories in the dark, surrounded by 4 strangers, might just terrify you." Maya just smiled. "Not a chance. I'm actually really excited." Elena leaned forward, a strange gleam in her eyes. "All right then, I'll go first. And this isn't just some story, it's like reality. In fact, I witnessed it myself. You might not believe it after you hear it." What chilling tale did Elena witness? Stay tuned. In a bustling coastal town in New Orleans, Marcus and Sophia lived what seemed like a fairy tale. Their home was a grand Victorian mansion, a testament to their love and success. But after 6 years of marriage, one profound sorrow cast a long shadow over their happy life. They couldn't have a child. The silence in the grand halls echoed their emptiness. Sophia, desperate and heartbroken, heard whispers of a voodoo priestess in the misty bayous, a woman who could weave miracles from shadows. She convinced a hesitant Marcus to seek her out. The journey took them deep into the heart of a foggy swamp, far from the familiar streets of New Orleans. There was no humble hut, but a clearing surrounded by ancient weeping cypress trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something primal. The priestess, with eyes that held the wisdom of generations, laid out her terms. No simple sacrifice would do. The ritual required enchanted dolls, carved in their likeness, and a blood oath sworn under a pale moon. Sophia, blinded by her desire for a child, agreed without a second thought. Marcus, seeing the flicker of hope in his wife's eyes for the first time in years, reluctantly pricked his finger alongside hers, their blood mingling on the weathered wood of the dolls. 9 months later, their wish was granted. A beautiful baby boy was born, filling the Victorian house with a life they had only dreamed of. Their joy, however, was a fragile, fleeting thing. As the child grew, a strange and chilling transformation began. He wasn't a source of light, but a drain. Marcus and Sophia felt their own vitality seeping away, day by day. Their skin grew pale, their steps heavy, and their laughter faded into weary sighs. The child, with eyes as black as the bayou water, seemed to grow stronger as they weakened. Their magnificent home, once a symbol of their love, became a gilded cage. Doors would slam in empty hallways, ghostly whispers would drift from vacant rooms, and the child's laughter would echo with a malevolent undertone. The house was no longer theirs. It was a haunted trap, feeding a demonic entity that wore the face of their son. Their dream had twisted into a living nightmare, slowly consuming them from the inside out. They became prisoners, too weak to flee, their life force tethered to the very thing they had so desperately wanted. Their love story became a ghost story, whispered on the streets of New Orleans. And me, I watch it all unfold from the shadows of this house, from the reflection in the dusty mirrors. I see their pain, their regret, because you see, I was there that night in the swamp. I was the wandering artist they were told must be sacrificed. My soul wasn't vanquished. It was bound to this place, forced to witness their slow, agonizing decay. My name is Clara, and I am the ghost in their machine. In the shadowed valleys of Tuscany, where gnarled vines twist like skeletal fingers, stood the grand Villa Rossi. The estate was a kingdom of ripening grapes, and the Rossi family, its proud, untouchable rulers. There was the patriarch Antonio, with his iron will, and his elder sons Vittorio and Raffaella, who savored their privilege. But it was the youngest, Luca, who held a spark of kindness, his heart unknowingly tangled with mine. I was Isabella, a humble servant girl. My days were spent in the kitchens and cellars, the sweet scent of crushed grapes clinging to my skin. Luca and I stole moments in the twilight, hidden among the vines, sharing whispers of affection and kisses that tasted of forbidden fruit. He promised me a future, blind to the darkness his family cast. The betrayal came on a harvest eve. Drunk on their father's finest vintage, Vittorio and Raphael cornered me in the wine cellar. Their malice was masked by the thick, fermenting air. Their actions shattered my trust, leaving me broken and with a secret I could not bear alone. When I confessed my plight to Antonio, begging for justice, he sneered and cast me out like spoiled wine. No Rossi blood would taint itself with village filth, he declared. The villagers turned their backs, and I wandered into the wilderness alone. I perished in sorrow beneath an ancient oak at the vineyard's edge, my life and the one I carried seeping into the cold earth. But that was not the end. As my essence soaked into the roots, a darker force stirred, an ancient legend of the betrayed who rise eternal. I awoke not as flesh, but as shadow and thirst, my skin pale as moonlight, my eyes gleaming with crimson hunger. I had become a vampire, born of vengeance. From the beyond, I watched Luca search for me, his mournful calls echoing through the vines. He grieved what he thought was my abandonment, never knowing the truth. But I plotted. The full moon became my accomplice, first Raffaella. He staggered through the vineyards one midnight, bottle in hand. I emerged from the mist, a seductive silhouette. Isabella? He murmured, confused. I smiled and embraced him in shadow. I didn't end him, though. I claimed just enough to bind him, turning him into a hollow puppet. By dawn, he wandered the villa, eyes vacant, whispering my name in fear. Vittoria fell next, in the cellar where it all began. He sensed my chilling presence as I appeared, a vision of his guilt. He reached for me, trembling, and I struck. My touch was a venom that flooded his veins with eternal servitude. Now he, too, shambled through the halls, pouring wine that curdled at his touch. Antonio, the architect of my ruin, resisted the longest, barricading himself in his room. But the vineyards were mine now. Their roots my veins, their shadows my domain. During a fierce storm, I slipped through the cracks in the stone, materializing at his bedside. "Phantom," he gasped. I leaned close, my breath cold as frost. "You spilled my trust." Now I claim yours. I left him alive but enthralled, a withered king forced to kneel before the servant he discarded. Through it all, Luca remained untouched. He saw the pallor of his brothers, his father's vacant stare, and heard the whispers of a vengeful spirit haunting the vines. He pieced together the horrifying truth from Forbidden's books. One fateful eve, under a blood-red harvest moon, he came into the vineyard, calling my name. I appeared before him, ethereal and hungry. "What have they done to you?" He whispered, his love warring with dread. I told him everything. Tears streamed down his face. "I would have saved you," he vowed. "Run away with me now. We can escape this curse." But it was too late. As he pulled me into a final, tragic kiss, I felt my thirst awaken. "Forgive me, my love," I murmured. My claim was subtle at first, then complete. His essence surged through me, sweet, pure, and laced with our lost romance. He gasped as I drained him, not to death, but to eternal bondage. Now, the Villa Rossi stands silent. Its inhabitants are my obedient shadows, tending the vineyards that feed my endless night. Luca wanders at my side, his love twisted into servitude, an eternal reminder of what could have been. I am Isabella, the vengeful spirit, and my story. The London fog has a way of swallowing sounds, of turning the familiar into something strange. I should know. I came here from the village, a girl with fields in her eyes, thinking I was marrying into a new life. London, they said. A world of opportunity. What they didn't mention was the brick-and-mortar sea of the industrial suburbs. The endless rows of apartment blocks, stacked so high they scraped the perpetually gray sky. My wedding day was a blur of unfamiliar faces and forced smiles. The apartment my new husband, Arthur, called home was a cramped space in a building that groaned under the weight of 100 other lives. As we returned that night, our small, cheerless procession shuffling through the damp streets, a crowd had gathered. Blue and red lights pulsed against the thick fog, painting a grotesque scene. A balcony on our very own block had collapsed. A woman had fallen. They had her covered with a sheet, but the wind, cruel and mischievous, lifted a corner just as we passed. For a fleeting second, I saw her face, pale and still. And then I swear, her eyes flickered. A slight, impossible movement, a final spark of life staring right at me before it was gone. Arthur tugged my arm. "Don't look, Emma, it's bad luck." But it was too late. I had looked, and she had looked back. Our wedding night was not filled with romance. It was filled with the unsettling memory of those eyes. Sleep offered no escape. I was jolted awake by a sound from the living room. A scraping, like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Arthur was snoring softly beside me. The sound came again, a long drawn-out groan of wood on wood. I crept out of bed, my feet cold on the linoleum, and peered into the darkness. Nothing was out of place. The worn armchair, the small dining table, all exactly where they should be. I dismissed it as the building settling, the groans of an old structure. I was wrong. The next night, it wasn't just sounds, it was whispers. Faint, like the rustling of dry leaves, seeping from the walls themselves. I'd press my ear against the cold plaster, trying to decipher words, but it was just a murmur, a current of hushed tones that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Arthur heard nothing. "It's just the neighbors, he'd say, rolling over. "This is city life. You'll get used to it." But how could I get used to the feeling of being constantly watched? How could I ignore the icy drafts that snaked through the room when all the windows were sealed tight? Then the activity escalated. It started small, a teacup vibrating on its saucer, a book sliding off a shelf. One evening, as I was setting the table, a fork lifted from my hand, hovered for a moment in midair, and then clattered to the floor. I screamed. Arthur rushed in, but by then it was just a fork on the ground. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. Your stress, love, the wedding, the move. It's a lot to take in. He thought I was losing my mind. Sometimes I wondered if he was right. But the phenomena grew more specific, more terrifyingly deliberate. Every night, around the time we'd passed her body, it would begin. A loud, splintering crack would echo through the apartment, like the sound of breaking wood. Then a sickening thud, followed by a rush of wind so powerful it would slam the doors and send papers flying. It felt like a reenactment. The furniture in the living room would begin to rattle violently, the old armchair rocking on its own, the table shuddering. It was no longer random. It was a performance, a terrifying nightly replay of a death. I was trapped. Every night, I was forced to be an audience to this ghostly pantomime of the woman's final moments. The cracking of the balcony, the impact of the fall. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My waking hours were spent in a state of perpetual dread, waiting for the sun to set. I looked like a ghost myself, pale and gone, with dark circles under my eyes that mirrored the ones I saw in my memory. Arthur grew distant, his patience worn thin by his wife's nightly terrors. I was alone with my haunting. I had to know who she was. I started asking the neighbors, my questions tentative at first. Most were tight-lipped, not wanting to gossip about the dead. But Mrs. Gable on the floor below, a woman with kind eyes and a sad smile, finally told me. Her name was Eleanor. She lived alone in the flat directly above us. She was a quiet woman, an artist who kept to herself. A shame, Mrs. Gable said, shaking her head. She'd been complaining about that balcony for months, wrote letters to the landlord, filed complaints, said the concrete was crumbling, that it was an accident waiting to happen. But he never did a thing about it, the landlord. A portly man named Mr. Finch, who always seemed to be smiling, a greasy, self-satisfied smile that never reached his eyes. He owned half the buildings on this street, collecting rent while the structures rotted from the inside out. Suddenly, the whispers in the walls made sense. They weren't just random sounds. They were Eleanor's unheard pleas. The nightly reenactment wasn't meant to torture me. It was a desperate cry for her story to be told. She wasn't a monster. She was a victim, silenced in life and trying to find a voice in death. I found a new resolve hardening in my chest, replacing the fear. I wouldn't be her audience anymore. I would be her witness. I started digging. I spent my days at the council archives, poring over building records and complaint logs. And there they were, copies of Eleanor's letters, each one more urgent than the last, detailing the cracks, the instability. And beside each one, a stamp, no action required. I found similar complaints for other buildings owned by Mr. Finch, a pattern of gross criminal negligence. He was knowingly letting people live in death traps to save a few pounds. Armed with a folder thick with evidence, I went to the press. At first, they were dismissive. A ghost story from a frightened newlywed. But the documents were undeniable. The letters, the records, the photos I'd taken of other crumbling balconies on Finch's properties. A young, hungry journalist saw the real story, not of a ghost, but of corporate greed and a man who valued profit over human life. The story exploded. The Ghost of Grenfell Block, one headline called it, a sensationalist name, but it got people's attention. An official inquiry was launched. Mr. Finch's empire of neglect began to crumble faster than his balconies. He was exposed, his smiling facade ripped away to reveal the monster beneath. The night the first major newspaper article was published, I sat in the living room waiting. The clock ticked past the usual hour. The air was still. The furniture remained silent. There was no splintering crack, no rush of wind. There was only peace. A profound, deep silence that felt warmer and more comforting than any words. I felt a gentle breeze, like a soft sigh of relief, pass through the room one last time, and then it was gone. Eleanor was at rest. Her unfinished business was complete. My marriage to Arthur didn't last. He could never understand what I'd been through, could never see past the hysteria, but it didn't matter. I have found a purpose far greater than the life I thought I wanted. I stayed in that apartment, in that bustling, foggy city. I became an advocate, a voice for people like Eleanor, for the tenants ignored and silenced by indifferent landlords. My name is Emma, and though I too am a spirit now, looking back on that life, I know what it means to find peace. It isn't found in the quiet of the countryside, but in the fight for justice. They say love can make you do crazy things. For me, it made me leave the neon glow of the city for the perpetual twilight of Lupini, a village huddled deep within the Romanian Carpathians. I followed my heart, which belonged to Andre, a man whose eyes held the same misty depth as the moors he called home. I thought I was starting a new life. I had no idea I was stepping into the final chapter of my old one. Lupini was different. It was a place wrapped in fog and ancient whispers. The villagers were kind but distant, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. There was a watchfulness about them, a shared secret that hung in the air thicker than the mist. Andre dismissed it as simple country superstition. "They're just old-fashioned, my love," he'd say, kissing my brow. I wanted to believe him. I really did. The superstitions were everywhere, strange symbols carved into doorframes, bundles of wolfsbane hanging from windows, and the most peculiar tradition of all, the howling. On the night of the full moon, as its pale light struggled to pierce the fog, the entire village would erupt in a chorus of howls. It was a chilling, primal sound that echoed across the moors, a human symphony meant to mimic wolves. Andre explained it was to honor a wronged ancestor, a local legend about a man who was cursed, and how their collective cry kept the curse at bay. He'd join in, his voice deep and resonant. I found it absurd, a city girl like me howling at the moon. I'd just laugh, close the shutters, and pour another glass of wine, deaf to their pleas for me to join them. I thought it was a charming, if bizarre, local custom. I was a fool. The first full moon I missed the ritual, nothing happened. Or so I thought, but looking back, that's when the changes began. It started subtly, my senses sharpened. The scent of pine from a mile away, the sound of a vole scurrying under the floorboards. It was all so loud. My sleep became restless, filled with dreams of running through moonlit forests, the wind in my hair, the thrill of the chase. I'd wake up with mud on my feet and no memory of how it got there. Andre grew worried. He saw the new, feral light in my eyes. "You look pale, Sophia," he'd say, his hand on my forehead. "Maybe you should see the village elder," but I was too proud, too modern. I dismissed my growing unease as stress, the strain of adapting to this strange, isolated life. Then came the second full moon. Again, I refused to howl. I sat by the fire, reading a book, while the village mourned with their voices outside. That night, the dreams were more vivid. I wasn't just running, I was hunting. I felt an exhilarating power, a strength I'd never known. When I woke, there was a scratch on my arm, deep and ragged, and a faint coppery taste in my mouth. Panic began to set in. Down in the village square, whispers followed me like my own shadow. They spoke of a sheep found torn apart, its flock scattered in terror. The villagers' glances were no longer just watchful. They were fearful, accusatory. They knew. They had always known what I was refusing to see. That night, Andre confronted me. He held up a silver locket, his hand trembling. "This belonged to the ancestor," he said, his voice strained. "The stories are true, Sophia. It's not a curse we ward off. It's a curse we hold within. Our bloodline. It carries the wolf, the ritual, the howling. It's not to scare a spirit away. It's to appease the beast inside, to remind it that it is part of the pack, part of the village. By staying silent, you told the beast it was alone." You told it that it was an outcast? I stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The heightened senses, the dreams, the strange hunger, it wasn't a curse from without. It was a metamorphosis from within. The city girl, the modern woman, was being consumed by something ancient and savage. The third full moon rose, a sickly yellow eye in the foggy sky. I could feel it pulling at me, a tide in my own blood. The pain started in my bones, a deep, agonizing fire. It was a shattering, a remaking. My screams were lost in the cacophony of cracking joints and tearing flesh. My human thoughts dissolved into a singular predatory instinct. Hunger. The last thing I remember of myself was Andre's face, pale with terror, as he backed away. He saw not his wife, but a monster. A tall, gaunt creature of nightmare, covered in coarse, dark fur, with claws that dripped with malice and eyes that glowed with a hellish yellow light. The beast I had become didn't recognize him. It only saw prey. The hunt was a red blur. The village that had been my new home became my hunting ground. The screams of the people I'd shared pleasantries with became the soundtrack to my slaughter. Their fear was a scent I could taste on the air, intoxicating and maddening. I was no longer Sophia. I was the curse, awakened and ravenous. Now I am a whisper on the wind, a ghost tethered to these foggy moors. My spirit is trapped here, a silent observer. The village of Lupini is gone. Only weathered stones and the chilling echo of my own folly remain. The beast still roams when the moon is full, a mindless, hungry thing that was once me. So if you ever find yourself in a strange, forgotten place and the locals ask you to join in their bizarre traditions, do not laugh. Do not dismiss them. Do it. Howl at the moon if you have to, because some ancient things are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be respected. The women looked at each other silently across the flickering campfire. That was heartbreaking, one whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackling flames. Now, she said, turning her gaze, let's hear from you, Maya. A young woman with deep, thoughtful eyes nodded slowly. Yes, why not? The story I'm about to tell, it's one I'm a part of. In fact, it started because of me. She drew her knees up to her chest, the firelight dancing in her irises. I was always just an ordinary girl. I preferred solitude, you know? Books were my best friends, music was my escape, and traveling brought me a sense of peace that nothing else could. But life wasn't always kind. I had friends, or maybe they were just acquaintances, who would tease me, spread the strangest rumors. I learned to just ignore it, to live in my own little world. It all began with an old vinyl record. I was cleaning out the dusty attic in my family home, a place filled with forgotten memories. Tucked away in a corner, I found a wooden crate. It held my father's old records from a music shop he ran years ago before it closed down. Most were classics, but one stood out. It was a simple black disc, the label faded and worn. In scratchy handwriting it said, "Play but don't listen." My curiosity was piqued. I thought it must be some quirky old song, or maybe a message my dad had recorded. Without a second thought, I slipped it into my bag. Later, at university, my friends noticed it peeking out. "What's that, Maya?" "Got a secret?" One of them teased, snatching my bag. I tried to get it back. "It's just an old record." "It's nothing special, just give me my bag back." But they were relentless. "An old record? Come on, let's play it." Against my better judgment, I let them. We found an old turntable in the common room. The needle dropped, and at first, there was just static. Then whispers started. Eerie, indistinct whispers, like someone was muttering right next to your ear, but you couldn't make out the words. The sound was so uncanny, a shiver ran down all of our spines. "What is this rubbish?" One of them laughed nervously, and they stopped the record. But even as they laughed, a seed of fear had been planted. After that day, everything changed. The very next morning, one of the friends who was there, Alex, was gone. No call, no message, just vanished. We tried his phone, his dorm, his parents. Nothing. A day later, Lila disappeared in the same way. Gone without a trace. Suddenly, it was just me and Theo left from our little group. That afternoon, Theo found me. He was pale, sweating, and his hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the record he was clutching. "Put it back, Maya," he begged, his voice cracking. "You have to put it back where you found it." I was confused. "Why? What's going on, Theo?" I played it again, he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "I had to know. Now it's over. Alex and Lila are gone, and it's my turn next. What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Where are they?" He just shook his head, a look of utter despair on his face. "They're not here anymore. They're just gone, and soon so will I be." He thrust the record into my hands and then he just ran. He fled and I never saw him again. I was alone. The silence in my dorm room was deafening. The record felt cold, heavy in my hands. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I put it on the player one last time. This time, the whispers were crystal clear. A single chilling phrase repeated over and over. "You've heard it. You can't escape." A profound sense of dread washed over me. The room felt occupied. I felt eyes on me from every corner. The curtains swayed, though the window was shut tight. A gust of icy air swept past my face, making the hairs on my arms stand up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I ripped the needle off the record, but the feeling didn't go away. The air grew thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I grabbed a bag, threw in a few essentials, and fled into the night. I ran until my lungs burned, until I found myself on a deserted road winding through the woods. I just kept moving with no destination in mind, just trying to outrun the voice from the record. Then through the trees, I saw a distant light, a campfire. I thought people, safety. I approached slowly, cautiously. And that's when I found you four, sitting here, just like this. Maya paused, her gaze sweeping over the other women. "Now you know. You've all vanished from that world, and now so have I." One of the women offered a faint, sad smile. "Yes, I suppose we have. Or perhaps we're dead. Like all of us here." The air grew still. Another woman leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with an eerie curiosity. "What was on that record, Maya? We want to hear it." Maya reached into her bag. "All right," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I still have it." She produced the black vinyl disc, and from a small, hand-cranked player, the sound filled the night. Static, then the clear, cold voice. "You've heard it. You can't escape." When the voice faded into silence, one of the women spoke into the profound quiet. "We've all heard it now, but we're already gone, so who does it come for now?" Maya's eyes drifted past the fire, past the circle of women, and into the darkness just beyond the tree line, where you've been listening this whole time. She smiled, a chilling, knowing smile. "The one who is with us tonight has heard it too."